From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul, Mission Control Tech, and most importantly, you are here, and that makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Don't believe us? That's fine. Ask questions. Question everything. Why? That's what this episode is about. We talk a lot about critical thinking on this show, and I think it's safe for us to say this when, over the years, when we've been doing this show, we have at times met with people who have been a bit dismissive from the jump and said, oh, this is a conspiracy show? Is stuff they don't want you to know? Basically, Alex Jones? And the answer is absolutely not. We prize critical thinking, and it's led us to some very strange places. But you, longtime conspiracy realists, have been with us the entirety of the drive. So we got to ask you and ourselves, when's the last time you rethought a long-held belief? Can anyone, the five of us, right? Paul and Matt and Noel and myself and you listening along at home, can you recall a moment where you had an epiphany, a sudden flash of insight or revelation that reversed a deep-seated certainty about something you'd believed for all or most of your life? Has that ever happened to you guys?
Matt, I mean, you've spoken about your experience often.
Yeah, it happened to me in college. Just rethought the way I viewed religion and the way religion kind of had a control over my general thought process and my willingness to explore certain topics. So yeah, that was a long time ago. Most recently, though, I watched the movie Moonfall, and I completely rethought the idea of the moon as a moon and not a spaceship.
I thought you were going to say I completely rethought the idea of being a filmmaker.
Yeah, it was, look, it wasn't, you may love Moonfall out there, but it was tough for me to watch, but the concepts were fun.
Are you saying the science didn't check out fully on every turn?
Or the script or the acting, etc. But listen, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to make a film. There are a lot of moving parts. And if you have ever made a film, whether it's a critic's darling, a blockbuster, or just something you got to show to your friends, then it is something to be proud of. And you should be proud of yourself for that. But what we're saying is what Matt's describing here is a relatively rare experience for most of humanity, because as we'll find, your brain, if you are human, likes to be your hype man in a lot of ways, even when it sounds like it's being very rude to you and telling you catastrophic things that are not true. Your brain is doing that because it wants to confirm stuff. Your brain likes to be right. I mean, that's why if you look at it from another way, you could say, if you have not had a moment of revelation, a eureka experience, then you have doubtlessly found yourself banging your head against a cognitive wall, trying your best to talk someone off the ledge of craziness. Uncle Mike, you might be saying, the world is indeed round, okay? Let's just get through Thanksgiving. But bro, come on, read a book.
Airplanes, man, I mean, if the world's round, how come when I take a flight, I don't see the curvature of the earth? Right. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, young one.
You're a flying spirit and the planes are really slow. So the spirit disses aside, you might know the facts are on your side. You might have physically printed out studies, right? And try as you might, you can't get the other person to listen. That has happened to everybody at some point in their lives, and that's the heart of today's episode. Why is skepticism difficult? How do we function as skeptics? How do we, like the Jedi, practice that sort of, not even ideology, but approach to the world? Spoiler, it's not as easy as it might sound, because a lot of people have basic facts about skepticism wrong, and your brain doesn't like skepticism. Here are the facts.
Yeah. Often on this show, and I think in a lot of maybe the conspiracy realm, the word skeptic alone functions as a thought-terminating cliche, the way the term conspiracy theory becomes a thought-terminating cliche within the skeptical halls of the world.
Mm-hmm. Which is the opposite of what skepticism should be.
Precisely. And on both ends, I think we shouldn't view those terms. But it gets a bad rap.
Yeah, like the idea of a skeptic being kind of a perma-grump who just questions everything to a fault. It doesn't really seek truth. It's just more out to kind of debunk and actually people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for an explanation there, we have dealt with this. I think we've talked about it on this show. Our colleagues on all the stuff shows, we had this moment of reckoning a while back, or at least I feel like I did, where we said, oh, we don't sound normal when we talk to people outside of our little nerd bubble, because when you start a sentence with actually, it becomes a thought terminating thing, right? In conversation. And a lot of people are not going to take the information you are attempting to relay as though you are speaking as an equal. They will find you condescending and pedantic. So without actuallying people, and we've turned it to a verb because it's American English and everything will inevitably become a verb, I think we've described skepticism the way it's perceived very well here. And the problem is that is a misperception. That's incorrect. What people are describing when they talk about perma-grumps like that is really cynicism. You're describing a cynic. Skepticism, by comparison and contrast, is much less aggro. It is a key part of the critical thought process. If you look back at the etymology, we all love etymology here. Skeptic is derived from the Greek. It's derived from the Greek word skeptikos, which literally just means look around or inquiring. And all that means is if you're a skeptic, you're determining the truth of something objectively based on the level of evidence.
Right. Just not taking things at face value, giving it a little bit of an extra think before you jump into a, ideology or concept or even a story.
Or to fully explore what's being laid at your feet when new information is coming at you, right? Not to just go, oh, okay. Or not to go, no.
Right. That's the thing. And it's weird because a lot of people in the age of the internet who identify themselves as skeptics are committing that latter sin you just described, that very non-skeptic, very cynical idea of, no way. You know what I mean? And you have to earn an no way. Just like a sketch comedy show has to go for a couple seasons before they earn a good, serious moment. Sadly, this nuance is often missed, right? I love what you're saying here, Matt, because it goes back to something called the Socratic method, which is asking generative questions, right? In a you might have to bleep me a couple times in this episode, Paul, in a non-shitty way. That's important. Don't ask questions. Don't be a dick about asking questions. Be sincere and genuine in your exploration. There's nothing wrong with saying, okay, if X is true, whatever X is, then what about Y? And then if Y is not true, what does that change about my understanding of X?
Yeah, the Socratic method is kind of like the scientific method for conversation or just for like interpreting data about the world. It really is about test, trust but verify, and test things, maybe not using the same kind of methods you would in science, but asking the right questions, digging a little deeper, doing your own homework.
Mm-hmm. And good conversations, I believe, are, well, this is a belief I may have to challenge. Good conversations are, in my mind, 90% based on honest and well thought out questions, right? And building upon those questions. The thing is, and this is a big secret of the world that a lot of really polemical people don't want you to know, the vast majority of human beings are intelligent and curious and generally good people. When they're given the access to necessary information and a safe environment in which they can digest that information, they're going to impress you. And you're going to think, hey, that's a good egg. That's a smart person. Unfortunately, for so many reasons, a lot of people do not have that access to information. And more importantly, they don't have a safe, unbiased environment to explore that information. And as a result, a lot of people believe really weird shit.
I mean, I would argue that people, by and large, do have access to the vast majority of all of the information of time immemorial. It's just a matter of where their beliefs and those surrounding them, as you said, Ben, are steering them.
Yeah, and people who have access to a phone, right, and internet service on that phone or a computer or something like that, but that's not true for everyone on this planet.
It's not true for everyone.
There are a couple barriers for sure, but I think we can all agree that the main issue is the environment in which that information is encountered and the different intervening variables that allow people intellectual freedom to explore those things. I mean, okay, so, it's a glass planet. I just fell in love with that phrase one day when we were freestyling it, but it's a glass planet. So a lot of people from Henry Kissinger on down believe dumb things, and they believe things that might sound weird to outsiders. Think of superstitions. You're a kid, you're walking along the sidewalk. You don't want your mother to be crippled by a back injury, so you don't step on cracks. That has no medical impact on your mom. I can't believe we're getting to your mom references so early, but you're not ruining the world. You know what I mean? There's not a nuclear catastrophe because you avoided panels on the sidewalk. You're not hurting anyone.
I mean, unless you're not paying attention to those around you and you cause someone else to trip, perhaps.
There you go. Yeah. All you have to do is take a little trip down the clubhouse lane and you will figure out how weird stuff is. Oh my goodness, you guys haven't experienced that amount of out there info being, said as though it's just absolutely correct and true in a long time.
Mm-hmm. I got to tell you, I was in a conversation with Clubhouse when I was going on there more often, where I did my best in a diplomatic way to present what I thought was a very kind rebuttal to some crazy stuff I heard. And the response to my rebuttal was, the devil comes in an appealing shape and speaks in fine form. And then 12 other people were like, yep, nope, yep.
This dude's the devil.
Get that devil out of here. Banned.
I know.
Banned.
Right. Well, it was a fun conversation. I mean, the thing is, we're talking then about the role of social dynamics in culture, right? You might live in a world or participate in a community that will actively shun or punish you for not participating in something that is dumb or incorrect. And maybe I shouldn't even say dumb. Problem is, throughout history, there are no exceptions to this rule. As we established in our earlier episode on the human brain, or our earlier series, your brain is brilliant. If you're human, it is fundamentally wired to recognize patterns, so much so that the mind makes patterns where none exist. This is also a huge part of the reason that a lot of people are prejudiced for or against something. Logic be damned, and scientists have traced the nuts and bolts of this. They got under the hood of the human mind and they found the region of the brain that keeps playing these pranks.
Yes, that part in question here is the posterior medial prefrontal cortex. And it is the part of the brain that is involved in evaluating and absorbing other people's ideas. And as you pointed out, Ben, it really wants to kind of maintain cognitive equilibrium. It does not like cognitive dissonance, which I guess is the alternative. It really wants to make you feel like everything is cool. You understand yourself and the way you relate to those around you and the world around you, and it will play some tricks on you in order to achieve that result.
Think about identifying a leopard out on a plain somewhere. Is there a leopard in that tree, behind that tree, in that grass? Is there one? It certainly doesn't look like there's one. Well, how does the human brain evolve to figure out when there is a natural predator hanging out and watching you and you can't see them easily, at least?
Or is it just a leopard of the mind?
And there's an evolutionary incentive for that. There's a cost-benefit ratio, right? It's quite, or calculation rather, it's quite brutal. The people who thought they saw a leopard, even when there wasn't a leopard, still avoided leopards. The people who said, no, that's just some weird play of light and shadow, and then were attacked and died, they didn't reproduce.
Anymore, at least.
Anymore, at least. And so we see that there is a higher likelihood for this kind of mechanism to evolve. And today it plays a huge role in the decision-making process. It's a gift and a curse, just like having a lot of money in a capitalist society. The same mechanisms that allowed you to survive in the wild can screw up your thought processes in the modern world. And, don't worry, it gets weirder because in addition to loving patterns, your human brain also creates feedback loops of affirmation. If someone seems very confident about something that you already sort of agree with, then you are all aboard, buddy. And you're probably not going to have a moment of thought where you say, well, I should look into that. No one's immune to this. If I saw a very charismatic person just taking over the airwaves of mass media and all they wanted to say was that quesadillas were awesome, I might not do a whole lot of research into that person. And I, like many people, like to think that I'm okay in the intelligence game.
Well, and on the flip side, if you see a person who you already trust and who has been right in the past or has said things that you found to be accurate and aligning with your personal beliefs, say something that maybe stretches credibility ever so slightly, you'd be much more likely to just take it at face value rather than do your own homework, because your brain's already taken that shortcut of believing in this person and believing the things this person says, because hell, they've been right in the past, and I've based my decisions on this person's rhetoric in the past. Why would they, do me wrong now?
Yeah, this guy is right this guy was right about quesadillas. He's on the money there. Maybe I should rethink my opinion about the shape of the planet Earth.
Whoa. What if that ultra confident guy stood up one day in a meeting and said, the world is both understandable and what did he say?
You son of a bitch.
Worth understanding. I mean,
That's great though. It sounds so good, man.
And I think we could all agree with that. And there's nothing inherently controversial in a statement like that, But that's the thing about rhetoric. You can have something that is on the edge, that's just innocuous enough to be like, yeah, of course. But there might be this grain of pushing you over that cognitive cliff that you don't even notice.
Yeah, but it's priming as well. And I think that's a great point, Noel. And I'm just still, I'm just tickled, Matt, because you pointed out a beautiful weaponization of information that I learned from a guy we all know and then used often. No apologies. But what we're describing hopefully this is something all of us listening today can identify with. This is also why, to the point about the flip side, this is why people with a really strong opinion on sports or politics or religion, they'll tend to reject information that challenges their existing notions, that hits against those feedback loops of the brain. And then they'll prioritize information that appears to confirm what they already thought. And this is not just for folks on a podcast saying this. A lot of assiduous study has gone into this. There was a study from 2019 that I think speaks to this directly.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this too just speaks to just like effort. You know, it's harder. It makes you kind of have to redo everything and rethink everything. We've already put all this work in. Why would I want to have to start from scratch? And I think this Nature neuroscience study to a degree speaks to this. Man, you were going to go into this. I think this one really got you.
Oh, yeah, this one got me so hard. It comes from Nature Neuroscience, as you said, Ben, from 2019. They looked really hard at confirmation bias. What is it? Why is it so powerful? And they found that humans, quote, tend to discount information that undermines past choices and judgments. This confirmation bias has significant impact on domains ranging from politics to science and education.
Yep. Shout out to our episode about how large corporations twisted the game on recycling. A lot of our fellow listeners didn't like to hear that, right? But it is true. And it's just, unfortunately, it's interrupting a feedback loop, or disrupting would be a better word. Belief formation is a hell of a drug, right? People don't like to be wrong. This is why you see countless examples throughout history of someone coming to the table with pretty hard evidence of something. It literally does not matter what that evidence is if it contradicts the social mores, the shared values and beliefs of that society. So this is so basic. This is Galileo. Right? This is people arguing about astronomical truths that do not have opinions, and their evidence is ignored or dismissed because they have questioned things that were not allowed to be questioned.
Well, or it can even, if you take it to a slightly more modern example, like in the Soviet Union during Chernobyl catastrophe, scientists and people literally working at the Chernobyl plant came to the government and said, this thing has happened. It will result in, nuclear fallout being carried far and wide. We should do something about it. To which the government replied, no, it didn't. And no, we won't, because it would undermine the inherent truth of our perception of what the government is, what we do and what we don't do. And even though, it was based inherently on fact, the way they reacted to it was by saying, essentially, what we say is true. So if we say this isn't true, then it isn't true. That's an extreme example, but I think that very much falls in line with what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can see these tendencies in every single human civilization throughout every single moment in human history. So what gives? It turns out folks are very susceptible to how information is communicated. We'll pause for a word from our sponsors, and then we're going to return and talk just a little bit more about this study to set up the best ways that you can practice skepticism.
And we're back. Hey guys, just really quickly, I want to point something out that's happening right now in the news that I think illustrates this pretty well. And it is the classified documents that were found within the Biden camps thing, because I think it's challenging.
In the garage.
Yeah, but I think it's challenging people's beliefs, especially if you're, on one side of the political spectrum. Like, that's something the other side does. That's something bad guy does. Oh, well, now that my team does this too. Wait, what's happening now? Is this the same? And it's just really kind of wreaking havoc within a lot of people's minds, I think.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad you mentioned this, because you'll see we'll talk about this too later in this episode. You can see the same story reported very different ways.
Yes, you
Did
can.
you see Karl Rove essentially defending Biden on Fox News, saying it wasn't the same as what was going on with Trump? And he drew it on like a whiteboard and said, like, A, it was a long time ago, clearly was an oversight. B, they cooperated immediately. But I mean, like, how weird is that? Talking about cognitive dissonance, the architect of the opposition's, whole political ideology is defending the enemy.
But it really depends on where your beliefs and kind of loyalties lie and how you're going to take in this information. And really what you were saying at the top, Ben, which information you end up taking in, and then how that changes how you think about it.
What a great example, Matt, because this also, this is something you may have, your mileage may vary, folks, but this is something you may have encountered. What happens when you run into a piece of news that confirms a pre-existing belief is you are far less likely to say, let me find out more. Let me read the original source, right? Let me see a timeline. Let me know in this case, what sort of classified documents, how long were they held, et cetera, et cetera. If you read something and you are maybe pro-Biden, then you could just stop at that one news piece and say, oh, they found it, they fixed it, that's great, because I was right, But that's unfortunately not what people should be doing. And this study proves this kind of thing. So that 2019 Nature Neuroscience study shows that confidence of a speaker has a clear role. There's a reason that you will very seldomly see public figures say they've had a change of heart. If you are an intellectually unpracticed person or an insecure person, then you probably think a lot about the concept of weakness, which is not the right way to approach anything intellectually. The idea that someone could change their mind is not weakness. It shows that their mind is active. But still, people love confidence, right? So if you already believe something and someone seems very strident and confident when they're telling you something that you already sort of agree with, even if, to your point, Noel, it's a little bit further past that ordinary conversation, then you're going to agree with them. That part of your cortex is going to fire up and say, ooh, buddy, we're cooking with gas.
It also kind of matters how tall they are. Kind of, just a little bit.
It does. Since the advent of television, in the case of U.S. presidents in specific, height has mattered, physical height, as well as the absence of facial hair. There's probably not going to be a bearded president of the U.S. For some time, unless the U.S. fundamentally changes.
What's he hiding back there?
Yeah.
What's he biding back there?
Exactly. He's biding his time to destroy us all. It's funny because some people do trust a bearded person and then think that it's comforting. So it's interesting that the studies or the greater perspective is that bearded people are untrustworthy. But I know plenty of people who find a beard very, calming. And when someone shaves the beard, I know, but I also will say that when someone who's had a beard for a long time shaves the beard, that breeds distrust.
Well, I mentioned this multiple times in previous episodes, and maybe this is what you're referring to. There is a spectrum of perceived trustworthiness for facial hair, at least in the West, and it varies across the world, right? In general, in the West, the spectrum is clean shaven equals more trustworthy, less experienced. On the other side, a ZZ Top level Gandalf beard means more experienced, less trustworthy. Stubble, kind of like what Matt and I are doing, is, at least on my part, Matt,
sexy,
calculated.
Oh,
calculated to be, trustworthy with an edge. Been through some stuff. I'll resend the study.
This is as short as my beard has ever been, so I think I'm somewhere in the middle.
It's looking good, Noel. It's looking really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, no stress. You look fine, man. The issue there is that we see all these, again, tiny intervening variables that can alter your ultimate conscious opinion because you're not thinking of all the pre-existing beliefs that got ding, ding, dinged, just like a game of mousetrap, right? Or a game of dominoes. And if you agree with this study, talked about stuff like guessing, like playing Zillow, looking at photos of a house and guessing the estimate. And if the participants that were paired together agreed on the estimate, they would sort of hype each other up about how right they were. And that part of their brain would start also, firing up. If they disagreed, their brains did not play this game. And so if we can see that with something as innocuous as the price of a house that neither person has ever visited, and probably never will, then we see that opinions that appear to hype your pre-existing beliefs bear as much, if not more, influence than facts. That's a dangerous tendency. That's why eyewitness reports carry so much weight in court, even when we know that they are cartoonishly unreliable. That's why scientists can talk all the livelong day about the human species' role in climate change in the age of the Anthropocene. And then if you look at statistics, you'll see that belief in that has actually dropped. The fix is in. That's what we're saying. The fix is in. If you are trying to exercise critical thinking, you need to know that you are outnumbered. So how do you fight against it? If you're like most people, in a self-reported poll, hypothetical, we haven't conducted this. If you're like most people, someone comes up to you and says, hey, someone comes up to you and you don't have an opinion about their facial hair or whatever, and they say, hey, do you prefer knowing an objective truth or feeling comfortable in whatever your beliefs might be? A lot of them will probably respond with, hey, trick question. You're being a jerk. My beliefs are true. That's why I believe them. I'm smart, dude. You're being offensive.
I mean, I think the closest thing that comes to mind with that for me is religion. The idea of is religion provable? Can you prove that the beliefs held by various religions are the right ones or are accurate historically, spiritually, scientifically, or otherwise? But to fully hold those beliefs and let it guide your kind of life and the way you interact with the world is in and of itself a comfort, for many people. It allows them some kind of peace of mind, whether it be belief in an afterlife, if they do good things, then this will happen for them or whatever. So that's sort of, but again, you're right, Ben, it is inherently offensive to that person if you posit it like, are you cool with just believing nonsense to make yourself feel better? That's essentially the mean version of that trick question.
Right. Well, and a lot of times, to be honest, and this is a shout at Christopher Hitchens and some other folks, a lot of times when people purport to assume that position, what they're really doing is feeding their own feedback loop. They're making themselves feel better. They don't give a shit about the answer to the question because what they're doing is an intellectual version of masturbation in front of someone else who is an unwilling participant. And I know that sounds brutal and crass, but it's very true. And if you really want to tackle this conundrum, this bag of badgers, you have to try exercising skepticism the same way you exercise any other part of your body. And at this point, folks, you may be asking, all right, fine, I get it. It's weird and it's tough and it's unfair. So how do I practice skepticism?
With an ab roller, right?
Here's where it gets crazy.
Yes.
Your brain is, in a very real way, predispositioned to do some pretty gullible things. And unfortunately, there's not a way to automatically flip a switch and practice skepticism. But there are some clear steps and techniques you can employ that will help you get a better handle on the concept. And we're gonna step through a few of these. Again, your mileage may vary, and we are going to be the first folks to tell you, or at least I will say, these are difficult to practice in at least my own experience. And I think all that goes for all of us, but they're worth trying.
I mean, it's the same way you have to practice, say, empathy. It ultimately involves stepping out of your brain, if that's even possible, or, putting yourself in another person's shoes or the shoes of another perspective, or again, just kind of, questioning and breaking yourself out of those feedback loops. So doubt is a very important concept to exercise or to consider, especially these days with all of this information just, whirlwind, just swirling around us, and people reporting it as though it were true all the time. There really are no safeguards against misinformation. Maybe there never were, but at least we used to have a journalistic code of ethics and all of that stuff that just seems to have really gone out the window, especially since internet stories are always first to market. It seems like some traditional press outlets are just trying to keep up. And so maybe we see sometimes things are reported in big outlets that prove to not be true too. So it's even harder because with, the media or anyway, many of these media outlets being owned by a very small number of families and corporations, it can be really easy to fall prey to these lines of thinking and reporting that maybe have an agenda. Not to mention commercials, the news cycle, campaign ads, things that try to influence what we think and act, and some networks that essentially operate as propaganda. Not naming names, but I mean it's true on both sides of political divides, and in other countries you have the ones that is pretty widely understood to be not based in fact, more entertainment than anything to get people riled up.
Yeah, I would just modify this one slightly because we're talking about, like, if we're making a list here, number one, first thing, have some doubt about stuff. I would just say it needs to be doubt that's led with curiosity, right? Not doubt that's led with just rejection of whatever is being stated, right? Exactly.
Yeah. Doubt is not an inherently bad thing, nor is it a measure of weakness. Again, this leads us to, and what a beautiful explanation, this leads us to the next crucial step. And you can put these in whatever order you want, folks. Detecting deception, right? That doubt is just, okay, let's ask some more, right? Detecting deception goes back to the provenance of a claim. Is it made with honest intention? Is this guy who is going to sell you a bridge for an amazing discount, is there a reason he wants the cash now? You know what I mean? It all goes back again to asking the right questions. Is this claim based on assumptions? Probably. There's supposed to be some kind of common ground, right, for a conversation to occur. If it's based on assumptions, is there support for these facts, research, studies? This is where matter of faith arguments tend to fall apart. Look, again, folks said it hundreds of times, I imagine at this point, on stuff they don't want you to know. Our position is there is nothing wrong with you holding your own spiritual beliefs so long as you are not harming yourself or others. And unfortunately, all too often, these beliefs can be twisted and disguised as though they are facts rather than opinions. And you can't, that is a deceptive move. If someone is quoting a textbook about physics versus quoting a spiritual work that means a lot to them, there is an inherent difference in those two things. And you are not, as so many people want you to feel obligated, right, in the world. And you are not obligated to believe things that are not facts.
And even some of those traditional journalism outlets that we were talking about will now do things like cite a tweet or two to describe an entire group of people's thinking around an issue, as if that one or two or three tweets is proof positive of an entire group, and that's not right either.
Well, yeah, this one being able to detect either deception or, I don't know, I guess it would be deception, even if it was misinformation. But being able to detect that when you're scrolling through whatever social media you use. More and more and more, the three of us have seen unattributed videos that are out of context with voiceover that has absolutely nothing to do with what's actually occurring in the video, but, you know, ascribes some kind of motivation or action that isn't actually taking place. I mean, it is terrifying, the amount of information that gets floated around and viewed thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of times, and there's the actual information is not there. It's deception.
Let's call it, maybe we also call it detect motivation, right? Like shout out to that guy whom I've never met nor interacted with directly, who made those YouTube hit piece videos saying that I was lying about the shape of the planet. Last time I'm going to mention flat Earth, but bro, if you're still tuning in, I hope you had a good holiday.
But really quickly, is it deception if someone really believes what they're putting out there? And how can we determine that if they never admit that they're wrong?
Right. And again, people don't like admitting they're wrong. A lot of people deceive themselves. Actually, honestly, you're probably deceiving yourself about something right now if you're a human being. And that's just, that's part of the game. Right. This is a question we have to quarrel with, because you don't want to cast aspersion on someone's genuine beliefs. You just need to know that you are not obligated to believe those things. You shouldn't be obligated to believe those things. That's a reason theocracies are as dangerous for the world as monarchies, which also request a huge suspension of disbelief. I think maybe we pause for a word from our sponsors and gird ourselves for one of the next ones, the trickiest one of the ones that's most often misused.
Could it be also Satan?
It's also a great film featuring Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino.
Oh yeah.
Let's see if you can guess it by the time we come back from our break. All right. I feel like we made that trivia question pretty easy, right?
He's an absentee landlord.
Who you carrying all those bricks for, Kevin? God? I did that monologue. I won an award doing that monologue in school.
No way. So, congratulations. That's great.
Not a prestigious award, mind
Was it
you.
a major award?
Let's see. I don't think anybody in the military gave it to me, but it was an award. But this, folks, we're talking about the devil's advocate. Actually, just to prepare for this episode, I rewatched the devil's advocate, and it's worth a rewatch.
It's got some bangers in it. It's good.
Yeah.
Like there's some issues, some dated bits, but overall, I think it's a pretty interesting piece that does have a message at its heart, at its core.
And oh man, one day maybe we'll just do an episode about film conspiracies if we haven't yet. So
we must.
It's not a bad idea. So the concept devil's advocate, away from the film. You've heard this used all the time, sometimes at bars where someone a few too many drinks in is deciding to be a jerk about stuff. But after all our conversation today about spirituality, religious beliefs, and all that stuff, it's funny to realize that the real concept of devil's advocacy comes from a religious institution. You see, back in the day, the Catholic Church had a bunch of people who were being put up as possible saints, right? Proposed as saints, going through beatification, canonization, etc. And so they would have these long debates and these processes to determine who was or was not, in fact, a saint. And the church said, all right, we got to be reasonable. So we have to have at least one person or group who comes in and says, here are the reasons this person may not be as saintly as we think. Hey, maybe we're all getting carried away in our feedback loop of fandom. So they created the role of advocatus diaboli, devil's advocate. And this was a check and balance just to make sure everything was on the up and up. But today, primarily, it means let me take a position that I don't necessarily agree with, and let me try to reverse engineer the logic from there, right? That's what it is when people are using it with honest motives.
It's testing.
Yeah, case test.
It's become such a part of the discourse. People will literally just say "devil's advocate," boom, and then say the thing. People understand what that means. It is to kind of create a thought experiment wherein we try to, like you said, Ben, work backwards from like a undesirable or not personally held conclusion to get to maybe where the actual truth lies. And usually the goal is to get somewhere moderate. Right, to get somewhere kind of between the extremes, between those poles.
So again, this is a tricky one, right? This is a almost like not a black belt move of critical thinking, but it is an intermediate level move of critical thought. You can't immediately dismiss something out of hand. You never should, even if it sounds absolutely ludicrous. Or even if you find it contradicts your previously held beliefs. This is where you go back to the Socratic method. We ask questions from both sides of an argument in an attempt to triangulate toward the truth. And it's a key step that is almost always ignored in hot-button issues and debates in mass media. It's for good reason. Because, one, it's a bummer to hear, right? And also in a media ecosystem that prizes out of context quotes, you could just cut someone saying, well, if I were to play devil's advocate, and then it sounds like they're agreeing with all kinds of stuff that they don't agree with. But the most important thing is that devil's advocacy as a concept is often misused, and people use it with incredibly scurrilous, scoundrel-like intentions. They're not, in fact, trying to understand a perspective. They're attempting to attack what they don't like by pretending to see the other side. Someone, for instance, maybe is stridently anti-abortion or pro-life. And they're saying, okay, well, to play devil's advocate here, let's say I love killing babies. Let's say I love the idea of a child dying. Well, where would I get that idea from?
Ugh,
and they straw man the argument.
Move.
A devil's advocate?
No, I've got people that I know that do that, and when they're trying to win in a debate with you over something political, they'll do that exact thing where they'll like take on your perspective but make you look like an idiot, right? Like that's sort of the move.
Your perspective,
or just whatever it might be. They're bastardizing it and making it extra gross to suit their purposes, and rendering you. How can you argue with that? Killing babies isn't good. The idea of killing babies, but that's also not what abortion is. Or, anyway, no, we don't have to get into that specific debate, but that's, I'm sorry, that really gets my dander up when people do that.
Well, in order to figure out what's going on there, you got to have a little thing called a bias detector. Hope you got one. You can build one.
Oh, boy. You can build one at home.
It's kind of funny. Bias, too, is a term for like amplifiers, like tube amplifiers. You have to set the bias for like tubes, and it makes the sound like a certain kind of timbre or not. And sometimes adjusting it in one direction or the other can change the whole vibe of the amp. And I'm sure they're not related, but they're spelled exactly the same way. And I can't help but think about that. It's BIAS. Yeah.
You're onto something. Bias is essentially, for our purposes here, is a baseline.
Yes, that's exactly right. It's calibrating.
Yeah,
yes.
A baseline that is pivoted in one way or another, right? Or something is given more weight than another. Bias detecting. Oh, Matt, we're ending on. You brought up one of the even trickier ones. This one is not as misused as devil's advocation, but it is nowhere near as easy as it sounds. When you hear bias detecting in rhetoric, then you think, or in conversation, right? Then you would think, okay, I can detect a bias. You know what I mean? If I read something from Xinhua, the Chinese state-supported media, about Uyghurs, I'm pretty sure what they're going to say. You know what I mean? Or if I know that a Democratic president is going to talk about a Republican senator, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be glowing praise.
Yeah, but it gets so much more complicated, right?
So quickly.
Especially in politics, because you're not just looking at, okay, which side is saying that? Which team is this person on? And what are they saying? Okay, I know that bias. Well, what about the donors that person relies on? What about the state that person comes from? You know, there's so many things. It becomes deception in the dark.
Love it. Love it. Yes. That's the thing, right? Because your brain also loves shortcuts. That's how it survived. It doesn't need to confirm that there's a leopard in that tree. It just needs to run in case there is, right? It saves time. So that's why when you hear a politician throughout the world make a claim, and you hear just a few, like maybe even as few as 1 to 3 contextual clues about that individual, you already have an idea about where they might stand on what they're saying. So let's picture you're tuning into the radio, right? You're driving somewhere or you're on public transit, whatever. For some reason, you're listening to radio. You're hearing these two politicians talk, and they're talking about something the politicians always talk about. They say the budget is FUBAR. We need to fix the budget. And they both agree on that. They're not going to publicly agree because they're very divided, right? But they're going to take as a given the budget, whatever the budget is, has problems, needs work. Also, this is urgent because their subtext there's a reason you vote for me, right? And you're not going to hear a conversation where they say, well, we disagree on some things, but the budget's pretty fine. It's actually a slow Thursday here in America. I hope everybody takes some time to hang out with their kids. They'll never say that. They'll say there's a problem and no one can agree on how to fix it. Harumph, harumph, harumph.
Well, another thing that's interesting that we're seeing really recently with this whole, division over electing the Speaker of the House, right? And like them not being able to get the number of votes and kind of the left and the right having to come together to figure out a solution there. You're starting to see folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who infamously was spouted all kinds of conspiracy theories and kind of nut job, lines about the craziest things you could possibly imagine, level type stuff and beyond, has now walked back a lot of that stuff and is literally saying, oops, my bad. The internet got me. I don't actually believe in any of that stuff, and I didn't really campaign on it, which isn't true. She did campaign on it, and she certainly spoke as though she believed it. But now, because of public perception of that kind of stuff shifting, even within the zealot types that maybe follow that stuff, she's made a calculation. So that in and of itself is also disingenuous or is its own kind of bias, right?
Mm-hmm. And this is where we can, toward the end of the show, we can conduct a very brief experiment. And I think it'll be illustrative. So back to our hypothetical politicians. One says, okay, yeah, the budget's messed up and we're in trouble. The only real solution is in tax cuts to empower wealth creators. And at the same time, we need to trim the fat. Let's cut government assistance across a range of programs. This is unpopular, they might say, but if we're being honest, and that's why you elected me, this is the only way to right the ship. The other person might respond by saying, yeah, the budget's messed up. Yeah, we have to fix it right now. And the answer is doing the complete opposite of what the distinguished gentleman from so-and-so said. We need to raise taxes on the wealthy, or here's one, have them actually pay taxes, and then we need to increase access to government assistance. Look, they say, I know this is unpopular, but you elected me to tell you the hard truths. It's going to cost the nation in the short term, but better access to education means better employees, better businesses, and better access to government assistance means lower cost for the nation in the long term. If you think back on that for a second, my fellow Americans, then I bet you can already guess which politician belongs to which big party. And due to your own pre-existing experiences and belief sets and feedback loops, you may be tempted to agree with one over the other. Actually, that's almost certain that you do. But false dichotomy aside, how much do we know about the nuts and bolts of these plans? Past those vague descriptions, right? At this point, we have to ask, like you were saying, Noel, not just the biases and motivations of these politicians, but also what you were asking, Matt, who funds their campaigns? What else do those campaign funders own? And then we have to ask our own biases, and they might not be apparent to us. That's the kicker. To be a skeptic, you have to use techniques of critical thought on yourself.
No.
Just as much as you do on others. I know. It's so much easier to tell other people to work out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's also like what's hidden in the margins of those bills that are being supported. You know what I mean? You might outwardly, as a politician, support a bill, but it's really just for the pork that's kind of hidden in there that really affects your constituencies or your high-level donors. And the bill might be, broadly accepted as a positive thing, but you're really only supporting it to get through the little things that you kind of sneak in there. So it's all very, very disingenuous and based around deception because of how complicated the system is. It's like reading the terms of service,
I would, okay. I'm gonna agree with you mostly. I would say that I think it is misleading for people to say the system is complicated. I think those in power want to portray the system as complicated to further their goals. And maybe that's cynical. I still have a lot to learn in this regard, for sure.
Devil's advocate, it's all ones and zeros, right?
Right, sure. But I think that though, like, how complicated are these things really? Anyway, that's maybe a different story. Skepticism, as you can tell, is not about dismissing stuff automatically, even if it sounds ludicrous. It's about asking questions, especially when people would rather you not ask those questions. And as the world continues to spin its merry way into chaos of conflicting narratives, everybody's shouting, no one's listening, people have less and less time to really investigate or interrogate this stuff. Skepticism is becoming increasingly important. At the same time, it's becoming increasingly endangered. We love hearing that someone else is wrong. We love telling someone else they're wrong. We do not like when it happens to us, even when it should. And so with that in mind, I would ask whether we should do a follow-up episode on something we haven't really talked about, which is how to approach or apply skepticism to the beliefs of our friends, loved ones, people who are important in our lives. That stuff can ruin relationships. I don't know. Should we do an episode on it?
I'd rather not.
We've certainly seen this kind of stuff ruin relationships and break apart families, during some of the escalative, rabbit holing that took place during COVID. People not able to have any common ground with their brothers, mothers, this stuff is real. And that's why this stuff is so important. And when I say this stuff in that context, I mean being skeptical and asking those questions and figuring out a way to talk to perhaps a loved one that has gone a little too far without alienating them or making them feel like you're talking down to them or that you think they're stupid. Even if you do. It's just not the way to handle it. You're just going to push them deeper into that rabbit hole by being disrespectful to them and dismissing their belief system outright. Ben, you pointed out it's about asking the right questions in a respectful way.
Well, it looks like we are a house divided on whether or not to do an episode on approaching skepticism with people close to you in your personal life. So let us know if we should go on that sojourn, if you'd like to join us, and if you have advice for your fellow listeners. To end on a positive note, a 2020 study from Pew Research showed that the public overwhelmingly agrees we all need to exercise more skepticism when we hear mass media. I was surprised to find 72% of adults in the United States say news organizations, quote, do an insufficient job of telling their audiences where their money comes from. So how do we wrangle with that? Oh, and also Grumpy Cat GIF. That doesn't matter. We're an audio podcast, but I thought that would make us laugh. And now it's time we ask, what you think, folks. We would love to hear your thoughts about skepticism. We'd love to hear about your experiences with moments where you redefined what you thought, or moments where you found yourself, what's the phrase we used earlier, trying to talk a loved one off the ledge.
Yeah, you can find us everywhere. We're online, as they say. We are Conspiracy Stuff Show on Instagram. On TikTok, we are also Conspiracy Stuff Show. On YouTube, we are Conspiracy Stuff. Also on Twitter, Conspiracy Stuff. On Facebook, we are Conspiracy Stuff, but we've got a little group called Here's Where It Gets Crazy. Join up with all the rest of the conspiracy realists.
And hey, if the internet's not your bag of badgers or other small rodent, I don't know what is a badger. It's not really a rodent. Who knows? No one knows. Well, let us know what you think. You can give us a telephone call and talk to us about badgers or any other story or topic that you find interesting. You got 3 minutes to leave us your message. Let us know a cool nickname to call you, and you may hear yourself appear on one of our weekly listener mail episodes. That number is 1-833-STDWYTK. And if none of that does it for you, why, you can do the old-fashioned thing. Send us an email. We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.